In part 3, we are going to commit this simulated mesh to a voxel layer. Before I do that, though, I may want to check the amount that it's extruded from the surface. If I want to reduce it, I can send a copy of it to the Retopo workspace, which I already did. We can adjust our extrusion here. I'm going to go into a negative value. Let's try negative 0.3. And then in the scope workspace, I can just update it by clicking Pick from Retopo. Now let's subdivide enough times to get rid of the faceting. Okay, so we are ready to commit it to a voxel layer at this point. I want to create a new layer to place it on. If I hit the Enter key now, you'll see what happens. It just doesn't have enough resolution. So let's go ahead and clear it from that layer. I need to ensure that I have the adequate amount of resolution before I apply it, just like I would in Photoshop. If I want to apply high resolution graphics to a small document, like a letter size or a business card, something like that, then I need to adjust the dots per inch. So here I would click Increase Resolution. So that's essentially giving you more voxels per unit. And now when we hit the Enter key, I can see here at the bottom the poly count, close to 1 million. And I'll hide these other objects and we'll look at the thickness, which is based on this parameter. So before you hit the Enter key, if you want it to be very thick, you might adjust this upward a little bit. You don't want to go too thin with voxels because you'll see, again, you'll get holes if it's too thin when smoothing, whether with a brush or smooth all, which is what we're going to do now. And I'm going to step out of that tool so I can see this voxel object a little more clearly. Okay. So I don't see any holes and it looks properly smoothed. Now we would want to increase the resolution sufficiently to include all the details of our stencil. So I'll click Resample and that will let me set it arbitrarily here. I can use this density modulation factor and see the estimated count, but I'll just click here and add it numerically. Let's try 30 million, should be fine. Okay, so we have our up-resed version. Now I want to mention this would be a good point if you wanted to create a cutout so that, let's say for example, with this one I'm going to go ahead and switch to a metallic shader. Let's hide this cutout version. So this is what we're going to apply the chainmail to. But my point is you can create a cutout by capping the ends of your Retopo mesh. Now I would want to create a clone. So how you would do that is you would select all faces on the layer like this. Click Clone and Apply. It's going to apply it to a new layer. And from there, what you would want to do is use something like R-fill. It would give you quads, and you could also use cap, but cap is going to look for a voxel object underneath. All right, so with R-fill, for example, with this one, it shows you a preview. So I can click here along the edge and it will bridge that. Okay, and you would do it to all these open ends here. I'm not going to do that. I just want to show how you might go about it. If you wanted to cut from the inside, you would take this cutout, right click and choose extrude, give it a negative value, let's say maybe negative 0.3, hit OK. And you can see how that extrudes inwardly according to each vertex, and you can ghost this chainmail layer and see how deep it would cut. Okay, so you might have to go back and adjust that. So let's hide our cutout and unghost this object. All right, so we're now ready to proceed to using our stencil. I want to go ahead and select the extrude brush and then use one of these shape marquees because we're going to select all the way around it. I want to make sure ignore back faces is unchecked because we want to go all the way through. We want to apply it to both sides. And I'll use, again, one of these shape marquees. Something like the rectangular lasso will be fine. Now the depth value is rather important. We don't want it to be too high. A value of 10 to 15 would probably be about right. So let's go with 15. I want to double check my polygon count to make sure that it's appropriate or it's sufficient. Now in our preview options for our stencil, by default it will be set from camera, but what we need is cube mapping. The camera is just a 2D projection, as the name implies, from the camera. But when we click something like cube mapping, you'll notice you no longer see that overlay. Not until you make some adjustment here. Okay, so we can rotate around, make adjustments to see whether or not it's going to be applied appropriately. Okay. It's going to apply this on the inside as well as the outside. Reset. And you can also invert. You can also distort the image. So let's clear the distortion. You could also save it and reload it later on if you need. All right, so let me readjust this. Cube mapping. We could also use our 2D gizmo by right-clicking the little green dot. You can left mouse click to move that gizmo about. If you want to see the adjustments, you can scale, rotate. You can scale it along an axis or move it along an axis and so on. I can right-click to remove that gizmo and just make adjustments with the standard widgets here. Okay, now let's go ahead and apply this. I'll drag select all the way around. Okay, so let's look at the result here. You'll notice something on the back side here. You'll notice how the pattern, it extrudes differently, right? And that's not what we want. We want it to extrude along every single vertice. So let me undo. One thing that's really important is the extrude direction. Vertex normal is what we want. Average normal is how we got that problem on the backside, or view direction. Let's choose vertex normal, and now we will reapply it. All right, so now we have the proper result. So once more, if we wanted to cut on the inside, we could use our cutout at this point. So let's extrude this. Instead of the negative direction, let's make it 0.1. Do it again until I see it actually poking through. There we go. So that's a bit too much. So I would have to adjust the extrusion slightly. Negative 0.05. Okay. And so now that's how you would essentially cut out those portions there if you want. All right. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. Let's hold down the control key, come to the right side of the layer, and drag it while holding down the control key onto the chainmail layer. So let's dare to smooth all one time. Yeah, I think we're in fairly good shape here. I'll turn shadows on. So that is our chainmail. In the next video, we are going to bake all of this detail down to our low polygon target mesh. Okay, so stay tuned and thank you for watching.